Okay, perfect. Well, good evening. We're going to kick off our community workshop for our housing element rezoning program. For those of us who have joined us, there'll be ample time for Q&A, and we're going to kind of just go through the presentation. It's a very short presentation, just explaining what we're kicking off our project today. And if you are able to either raise your hand, then we can unmute you, or if we do encourage that you put your questions, comments in the message box. Thank you. Jenna, next slide, please. And just some Zoom meeting format and tools. You have a little bar underneath your Zoom link, and it shows the mute, the video, participant panel, the chat area where you can put your questions, comments. We have the share screen presentation. That's what you're seeing right now. Again, this workshop is being recorded, and where it shows the reaction, you can raise your hand from that button. Great. So like I said, my name is Sarah Toma. I'm a senior planner with the planning division. I am the project manager. And we have Cecilia Garrido Daly with us. She's our community development director. And we have Precision Civil Engineering. They're our consulting firm that assisting us with this effort. Bonique, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Bonique Emerson, and I'm a planner with Precision Civil Engineering, and I'm managing this project on our side.
Perfect. Thank you, Bonique. Just a quick outline of our workshop today. So we're just going to basically go through the workshop overview. We're going to talk about the housing overlay and objective design standards. We're going to talk about community input, that we have a survey out, and then we're going to go through the Q&A. Again, we encourage you, if you have questions, comments, please put them in the notes box. All right, workshop overview. We're going to talk about the purpose and goals, housing element implementation, and the project timeline. And then just as a check for the Zoom, am I speaking loud enough? Sometimes I can't. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Shen, for nodding. All right, so the workshop purpose and objective. Basically, this is just a workshop to introduce the project to the community and receive input on the city's efforts to implement the housing element update. The workshop objectives are to understand how the city is implementing the housing element update, learn what a housing overlay is and how it works, learn what objective design standards are and how they are implemented, and identify ways to participate and provide input. And just a little bit of a background, the city, as required by state law, all cities and counties are required to have a housing element, a certified housing element. And the city of San Clemente was able to complete a full housing element update for the period of 2021 to 2029. It's an 8-year cycle. And we were able to get it certified by the state back in October of 22. And this is basically the next phase of that project. And the housing element provides policies and programs to maintain and improve and accommodate housing needs in the city. And it includes a housing action plan with identified implementation strategies. Like I said, there's an implementation of the housing action plan, and the goal of that is to provide adequate sites that are properly planned, zoned, and available for residential and mixed-use development. And part of that, which is to create and apply a housing overlay, and also to develop and codify objective design standards for the housing overlay sites. And I just wanted to provide our timeline for the project. As you can see here highlighted in the red box, this is our workshop that we are in, and this is a year-long project. There will be ample time for the community, for our design review subcommittee, for our planning commissioners, and ultimately city council to provide us with feedback. We have it kind of set up in winter, spring, summer, and fall. So for right now, we're doing our public outreach. Last Wednesday, we hosted our in-person workshop, and today we're hosting our virtual workshop. We also have a community survey out that will go over shortly after in the end of the slides. We're also doing stakeholder interviews and property owner interviews to solicit feedback. And then in the springtime, we're going to we're going to draft zoning amendments and the objective design standards. And then during the summer, we plan to have two design review subcommittees to present those drafts, zoning amendments and objective design and get feedback. And we also plan to host two planning commissions study session meetings, again, to solicit feedback and ultimately go in the fall for a planning commission and city council hearing. Okay, so our next section is the housing overlay and objective design. We're going to just briefly talk about current city process and then our existing housing overlay. And then we're also going to talk about how we're going to develop objective design standards. So our current city process for discretionary process timing, projects that require to go to city council require about 19 weeks of review time. And that's basically from the time the applicant submits an application all the way going to a public hearing to city council. That doesn't really take into effect if a project gets continued or it gets delayed or whatever kind of situation may be. These are just estimates. These are something that we're going to look into as we create the overlay. All right, and I think at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Monique.
Thanks, Sarah. So now I'm going to be discussing the two projects that Sarah mentioned that we're working on to implement the goals of the housing element. So the first one is related to modifying a zoning overlay district. So currently the city has the affordable housing overlay district, and it was adopted in 2006 and it was modified in 2011 and again in 2018. And this overlay district applies to mixed use and neighborhood commercial zone properties located along El Camino Real. And as you can see in the map on the screen, that's where this overlay exists. And the purpose of this overlay is to encourage affordable housing in the commercial corridors and allow housing subject to special requirements in the zoning ordinance. Next slide. So this is what we're working on, which is a proposed housing overlay district. And in this program, we're proposing modifications to the existing affordable housing overlay district. And some of the things that will change include changing the name of the district from affordable housing overlay to just housing overlay. And also as part of this program, it will add sites to the overlay district. It will continue to allow residential uses in non-residential districts within the overlay, and it will allow a streamlined process if the project complies with certain standards, which are called objective design standards, which I'll be talking about in a bit here. Next slide. Oh, actually go back. So this, the map that's shown on the screen on the previous slide, as you can see in the red are some of the sites, potential sites where the overlay will be added as part of this program. Next slide. So what is an overlay district or an overlay zone? An overlay zone is a zone district that is layered on top of another existing district that implements additional regulations. So as you can see from this image here, you have land and then you have parcels, and each parcel has a zoning designation, whether that's single family residential, multifamily residential, commercial, etc. And then what an overlay district does is it's a layer that's added on top of the existing zone district. So in the case of this overlay district, it will be adding additional permitted uses. But one of the things to remember is it doesn't take away any rights that are currently permitted within the underlying zone district. So a property owner or developer can still do what they wanted, still do what they currently can do in the underlying district. The overlay just adds additional allowances. Next slide. So next I'm going to be talking about objective design standards. So what are objective design standards? So they provide a clear set of design requirements for new development, and these requirements are measurable and definitive as opposed to subjective guidelines that require interpretation. So for example, guidelines which are subjective, tend to be preferences and opinions and interpretations, whereas standards are more rely on facts. Guidelines tend to be recommendations that are not clearly enforceable, whereas standards are requirements that are enforceable. Guidelines are open to interpretation and difficult to measure or verify, whereas standards are measurable and verifiable, and they take the guesswork out of when a planner is reviewing a project. It makes it a little bit easier and straightforward to review compliance. And then finally, with guidelines, there are the words that are used typically are should and may, whereas with standards, words like shall, must, or is required to are used. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about the city's existing design guidelines.
Thank you, Monique. So part of this effort is, I had mentioned before, we're going to create objective design standards or develop objective design standards. And a part of that development, we're going to basically look into our existing city design guidelines, our architectural design guidelines, and specific plans have various standards also within them. And so we're basically going to kind of take those into consideration as we develop the objective design. So we stay true to the character of the community as we develop these. Next slide, please. And then I'm going to turn it back to Bunny. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sarah. So next we're going to discuss what is included in the elements of objective design standards. So objective design standards can include building design or site elements. And I'll get into more detail in the next few slides, but generally building design includes massing and articulation, roof design, character defining features, building details, and architectural elements. On the other hand, site elements are, as it is in the term, things related to the site. So landscaping, parking, lighting, and building equipment and service areas. Next slide. So here are some examples of elements of objective design standards. So first, one building design element of ODS includes massing and articulation, which massing and articulation is the feeling and logic of shapes in space. So the building articulation also included are roof design. So whether a roof is pitched or flat, the color of the roof, or the material on the roof. Next slide. Additionally, another building design element could include courtyards, paseos, patios, plazas. So areas that are related to features on a building site. Next slide. Also included in building design are building details, including doors, windows, wall surfaces, ground paving, and material color. Some optional architectural elements included in building design are awnings and balconies, decorative elements, pedestrian walkways. And here we have just examples of what those look like. So objective design standards, they do regulate building design. Next slide. The elements of objective design standards related to site elements, as I mentioned before, include landscaping, so requirements for landscaping, requirements for parking, whether the parking is covered or uncovered, publicly visible or non-visible, also includes lighting and types of lighting, amount of lighting, and finally, some other site elements that can be regulated with objective design standards include building equipment and service areas. So that includes where mechanical equipment is located, and it can also regulate solar energy systems. Next slide. So this slide just details some of the language differences between design guidelines versus objective standards. So an example condition related to a design guideline would be each dwelling unit should have a sense of address or a sense of place, either toward the street or directly to interior open space on the site. Hidden units to the rear of buildings or units opening to parking lots are discouraged. So this is very subjective. So it isn't clear what exactly is required, because using words like discourage, well, can I propose it or not propose it? Or, sense of place, the language is not very clear. Whereas with objective design standards, as we mentioned before, words like shall and prohibited are used. So it's really clear what is required and not allowed. So in this case, each dwelling unit shall be oriented toward the street or directly to an interior open space on the site. Hidden units to the rear of buildings or unit opening or units opening to parking lots are prohibited. So again, it's very clear. There's not a question of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So the difference is design guidelines are subjective and open to interpretation, whereas objective design standards are objective and clear. Next slide. So one of the important things to remember with objective design standards versus design guidelines is you still get the same result. So sometimes people worry that having these kind of checked conditions or checked requirements will result in design that's not as great as when you have design guidelines and you have a little bit more leeway. Well, the thing to remember is that objective design standards codify the language and just make them more enforceable. And both the subjective and objective language results in the same design. The benefit of the objective standards is that it's enforceable and predictable. So predictable is kind of an important word or an important part of the process. Having predictability in a process is good for both the city and for developers and applicants, but it achieves the same high quality outcome. Next slide. Next. So how will the objective design standards be implemented? So they'll be implemented during the normal planning review process and verified through a checklist. The process is quicker than the normal design review process, and projects would be considered ministerial and approved at the staff level. So again, the idea, the projects would go through the same process as normal. It's just that instead of going through, iterations of revising their plans, the requirements will be clear and upfront. So in theory, an architect or a developer will have the clear standards and hopefully they can go through them the first time and have a project that would be acceptable to the city. Next slide. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about community input.
Perfect, thank you, Monique. I think our Zoom facilitator, are we gonna skip all that? Okay, sounds good. We originally had a poll going just kind of to get people's feedback, but unfortunately we haven't had enough participants today. So we're gonna just talk about, currently we have our community survey that you can scan the QR code on your screen, and that'll take you directly to our survey. It's running until March 10th. The survey basically goes through, we just wanted to solicit community design preferences on objective design for multifamily and mixed use. And Jenna, I don't know if you want to kind of take us through a little bit of the survey and what it looks like. Maybe that'll help. Perfect, thank you, Jenna. So the survey format has three sections. It focuses on community character, design preference, and then just a quick demographic information. And we tried to make it very straightforward, images and kind of selection. It shows obviously our existing areas of where mixed use is allowed. It goes through very, let's see here. So here's an example under for community character. We go through what is your favorite building in San Clemente? What design features do you like most about the building? And the idea behind the survey is just to solicit information from the community and wanted to get your feedback of what is important. Again, we want to maintain the character of the community as we develop these objective design standards. And then Jenna, if you can pull up our presentation. Perfect. And then just next slide. And then now we get to our Q&A. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to, again, put it in the meeting chat area, or if you have questions, you're more than welcome to email me or call me at the information on your screen. I'm always available. I'm also always in the office, so you can come by if you'd like to chat in person. I know sometimes that's easier. And that's it. Thank you. That concludes our presentation.